Emeritus Ros-Lehtinen.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Today's hearing, as we know, focuses on a subject that all too often gets overlooked or ignored when discussing the crisis in the Middle East and specifically the fight against ISIL. We have discussed this in our Middle East and North Africa subcommittee on several occasions alongside Chairman Smith and his subcommittee, and Chris Smith has been a tireless advocate for this issue. ISIL has issued warnings to Christians in Iraq that they can convert, pay taxes, or be killed. Churches are being destroyed, religious artifact sites are being raided, and many Christians and other religious minorities have been forced to flee. ISIL massacred 20 Coptic Christians in cold blood in Egypt, but the list goes on and on. However, we must acknowledge that ISIL doesn't just target religious minorities. Everyone who doesn't ascribe to its form of Islam is a target. So that's why it's imperative that we not only defeat ISIL, but we find a way to defeat its radical ideology as well. It's also important to recognize that the persecution of religious minorities isn't just isolated to ISIL or to Iraq or to Syria. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom has repeatedly called upon the Obama administration to designate countries like Iraq, Syria, and Egypt as countries of particular concern. That's a special classification. Why? For their systematic, ongoing, and egregious abuses that the religious minorities face in those countries. Many of us in this committee have decried the fact that the Iranian regime's deplorable human rights record and its persecution of religious minorities were not made a part of the nuclear negotiations from day one since the P5+1 efforts were announced. A nuclear deal will legitimize the Iranian regime and will only serve to make the atmosphere even worse for religious minorities in Iran. Iran's meddling in Iraq, its support for Shiite militias, those have played a significant role in the rise of ISIL and the current difficulties that we face in the region in the fight against the terror group in Iraq and Syria. And now we have seen the size of the religious minority communities decline dramatically in Iraq and Syria as a result of ISIL's onslaught. So, Sister Diana, I'll ask you, you felt the pain and the suffering of your own community, and you've been witness to what ISIL has done to ancient religious communities of Iraq. You have been displaced twice. Can you describe for us the conditions in Mosul where you were forced to flee to Kurdistan? And could you please also detail the conditions in Kurdistan? And lastly, what we do to meet the needs of religious minority communities? Where can we be most effective?
Thank you, Ms. Ross. I would answer your question in a story that it touches my heart a lot and the heart of the people that we're working with. When we were forced to leave, our children became without any education, without school. So as a congregation, we care a lot about education as Dominicans. So we started opening kindergartens. So we'd had 135 children in one of the kindergartens. We handed in one of their classes, we handed them papers to draw on the paper. Amazingly, most of the children, they draw back home, their hometowns. They draw their beds, church, homes, everything that they relate back home. So when we asked them, why did you do that? They said, like, we miss home. We want to go back home. We want to live normal life. 5 years old, when he stood up and he said, I don't feel like I am home here. When I was home, I used to go to the kindergarten. I used to go to church with my family. I used to play with my toys, with my friends. That was the normal life when we were back in our homes. We used to live normal life. We'd have education. Our parents, brothers, sisters, if they are employed, they would go to work. Now it's the opposite. People are jobless. Women do not have any work to do. They are living in containers or living in unfinished buildings, facing terrible conditions. Besides, the humanitarian aid is not enough for them. So it's so different that today, even our children, what I want to say, our children, they feel that they don't have a place to live properly. They don't have home. So our life has changed tremendously. And since before we were this bridge that we can connect among the diversities, now we felt we're alone, we're abandoned. That's how we feel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. We certainly know that ISIL doesn't discriminate. You're either with the terrorists or they will destroy you or subjugate you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eliana. We'll go